set of skills which allows you to understand how you are feeling and how to regulate those feelings. You say autistic and ADHD are at a disadvantage. Why do you say that?
The world is built for a certain kind of person and society is built for a certain kind of person. And if you don't fit into that space, then you're going to have problems. And the idea that the world is built for a certain kind of person and society is built for a certain kind of person. And if you don't fit into that space, then you're going to have problems.
From someone that's not autistic, but just doesn't show the same empathy. So like let's say like a murderer, like they murder someone and they just like don't care about the person. But like, would you say that person does? Like, what is an example like what you would do, and then like now, like how is it better now?
Just like there's a range in gender, there's a range in autistic people. So
would guess men are harder to train to be more empathetic than
the kind of guy who listens when people talk and says, "Oh, that sucks," then you're girly, right? Or you're not masculine enough, right? So that's a cultural.
Yeah, so let's talk about you. So like the trait. Yeah, sorry, the kind of part of the job here.
No, it's good. You can build this trait. So it's the same as any other trait. You have an internal sort of range that you're born with, but you can push the upper limit of that range or pull it all the way down based on how you practice the skill. Humans can become highly resilient. We have a lot of opportunity in us to be able to do hard.
I mean, I'll like disagree with you on that because I don't think I don't know like you growing up, but like do you think all people that have gone through horrible shit are all better people after college? Like you don't really have tests anymore, and you're just kind of like on your own, and so we got to create our own challenges.
Yeah.
Would you believe me that I would probably be your hardest patient to deal with in terms of mechanism? How would my face processing your brain? Like you recognize yourself in a photo? So, like,
it's not rare. Doesn't that suck? There's so many of us. So
like, what triggered you to be like, hey, I might have I get audio processing. Like what triggered you to try to get campy?
They say they want you to be straight. Neurotypicals say they want you to be straightforward, but if you do it, it's rude.
Yeah. See, that's like that's where the problem comes in.
And I learned that autism tends to present differently in women than it does in way. Autism is a diagnosis for children. Most boys, most white men are identified pretty with the masking terminology. Is there's this idea like you have the mask on and then you take it off. And for me, that's not really representative.
Could you just accept yourself as is and move on, I guess? Hello, welcome to my podcast, to my friend Joey Stoots. I am Joey Stoots, and I'll be giving a mic to Danielle Sullivan. She is an autistic neurodiversity advocate, life coach, parent of two, and fellow podcaster. How are you today?
I'm doing so well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited. So let's define the word neurodivergent. Prior to meeting you, I had no idea the word even existed. The term was created in the 90s, so basically a new term. It says here that it refers to the concept that certain developmental disorders are normal variations in the brain, and people who have these features also have certain strengths. What are your strengths?
So I'm autistic, which means that I am really good at pattern recognition. I'm really good at problem solving. I mean, honestly, those are good ones. I also, because I have trouble with, we can talk about this more in a minute, but the kind of opposite of neurodivergent is neurotypical, which is somebody who's not autistic, not ADHD. Because I work with those folks every day, obviously, being most of the population, I'm really good at noticing their how they converse socially and how they make overtures socially. And so part of what I do is help teach that to other autistics, but also teach neurotypical people how to communicate with us better, because it has to be a two-way street. So yeah, pattern recognition and problem solving, I would say, are my main two strengths.
When you say problem solving, do you mean in terms of like math homework or?
I'm okay at math. That's not my strong suit. Problem solving in terms of oh, I have many weaknesses. Don't you worry. Problem solving in terms of being able to work through the blocks and the kind of stuff people aren't actively noticing that are causing them to not see obvious solutions to the issue. So a lot of what I would do, both in my family as a parent and as a partner, and also with clients, is kind of dig into what are some ways we could solve this. And then anytime somebody's like, well, I could do this, but it wouldn't work, because those limiting beliefs, those ideas of why something couldn't work, really trying to break those down and figure out, well, could it actually work? Is there a way we could make this work for you? Because often, especially with autistic folks, we tend to have a little bit of that black and white thinking of thinking it's all or nothing. And once you really dig in, there are options there that you didn't realize were there initially that might be a real solution. So yeah, so I'm good at that.
You have a great podcast episode and Medium article about emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
You say emotional
Thanks.
intelligence is a set of skills which allows you to understand how you are feeling and how to regulate those feelings. You say autistic and ADHD are at a disadvantage. Why do you say that?
Because we have different brains, we have different ways of thinking, problem solving, approaching the world. We are in a neurotypical world. And so the world is not built for our brains. And this comes from disability studies, which, I'm sure many of your previous guests have talked about, but the idea that the world is built for a certain kind of person and society is built for a certain kind of person. And if you don't fit into that space, then you're going to have problems. And the way that we communicate and talk about our emotions, and even the way we conceptualize how emotions are, is from a neurotypical perspective, from a certain kind of brain's way of functioning. Autistic and ADHD people have the same feelings. And, I'm not trying to say that we're different species or something, but that the way that we embody our feelings and the way that we process those feelings in the brain can be very different than the way neurotypical folks do. And so we are taught neurotypical solutions for totally different brains, and we can't use those solutions the way they're meant to be used. We're just not neurotypical people. Different approaches need to be taken with autistic ADHD folks, and neurotypical people need to become more aware of the ways that we process emotions differently. It needs to be a two-way street, is kind of what I'm getting at. The same way with communication. We need neurotypical people to know more about how autistic ADHDers function, and also for us to have more access to the emotional intelligence strategies that work for us. So
are you saying that most autistic and ADHD people most of them have problems empathizing with people?
No, not at all. Empathy is, we have studies that show, if you want to go research-based, evidence-based, that empathy is present in all neurotypes, and about the same amount of autistic ADHD people show, let me rephrase that average level of empathy exists in all populations, regardless of their neurotype. But the way that we access our emotions is different. We need more time to process our emotions. And the way that we show how we feel is different, can be different. So we all feel empathy, but the way that autistic people, the way that we process it is different. I'm trying to think of an example. One of the issues, I think, is that most of the research we have on empathy is from neurotypical scientists, so people who are not autistic or ADHD. And they look for neurotypical cues. So they say, well, how are you showing empathy? Are you, sitting with the person and consoling them? Is your facial expression matching theirs, right? If they're sad, are you making a kind of sad, concerned face? Are you making eye contact with the person who is having a bad time, right? And these are ways that a neurotypical person might show empathy. Autistic people show empathy differently. We still feel it, but we might not be making eye contact, right? We might not be touching the person because we might not want to be touched if we're feeling upset. We might be trying to problem solve instead of kind of consoling. So our manner of approach is different. And to a neurotypical scientist who's done this evidence-based research, that might look like we're not empathizing, but we are. It just looks different on us. Does that make sense?
I'm just a little confused because what makes that different from someone that's not autistic but just doesn't show the same empathy? So let's say a murderer, they murder someone and they just don't care about the person. But would you say that person is autistic?
No, they're totally separate. So
yeah, please don't murder anyone that's out there. Thank you.
Please don't murder anyone. No, so this is a common issue, I think, and it is hard to explain. So I'm sorry if I'm not doing it justice, but empathy is an awareness of other people's emotions and feeling the feeling of being in a group with them, that you're part of the same team, that you're part of the same. So they're a friend, they're part of a coworker, they're one of your friends, they're a coworker, they're a member of your family. They're somebody that you have a connection with, right? But you can also feel empathy for just somebody you've never met. But it's this idea that, oh, we're both people, right? That human connection. And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to like get into the nitty gritty of like what sociopaths can and can't do, because I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I'll forward all the hate mail I get to you.
Go ahead, and I'll just like, but from my understanding, in that case, the lack of empathy is the sociopath feeling like they are better than human, right? That these people are not, the people that they're killing are not human, right? That they're something lesser, right? An autistic person generally, and talking broadly, I'm sure there are sociopathic autistic people that exist, just like there are sociopathic neurotypical people that exist. But broadly, we do have that internal, it's a difference between the internal and the external. We have that internal empathy. We want to be on the same team with you. We view each other as people and we have that human connection. But the way that on the outside that we're showing it might be different, right? And a murderer, I would assume, would not have that internal faith at all, would just be like, you know, you're not a person.
So it kind of seemed like it's the opposite, that a murderer can express empathy, but they don't actually feel it to pretend they're blending in. And you guys have the empathy, but you just have difficulty showing it.
That might be the case. Yeah. And I think this is very, very broad, right? Like there's all kinds of autistic people. And that's why sometimes it's referred to as a spectrum. And some of us show empathy very similarly to the ways that neurotypicals want us to. Some of us do make that eye contact, or some of us don't. Some people don't mind touch, and some people really mind touch. So there is a range. But I think that on the whole, yeah, that if you're looking in general, I would say that a lot of the ways that people misunderstand autism is people expect us to look the same as a neurotypical person. We just don't have that kind of affect. Like our inside might be the same, but the way we're feeling might be the same, but the way that we're showing it can be very different.
I mean, it makes sense that this is kind of new news, because like I didn't think it'd be so psychological, because I just think some are just not equipped or just don't know how to show empathy, or they just like when I was reading all your articles and such, you have to teach people how to be empathetic, like actually show it. So I never did realize that people are just not really born with it. I feel like it's kind of you're either born with it or you're not, and then you're just stuck with whatever your body gives you.
Most people have a natural range. So it is true that if somebody's born with low empathy, internally, I mean that they don't care about other people, right? That you can increase their empathy, but they're never going to be like, you know, I don't know, if you're thinking of a numerical scale and somebody's born at a 5 out of 100, you might be able to get them up to a 20, but they're never going to be a full 100, right? Whereas somebody who's born at 100 might sink at some points to an 80, but is never really going to go below that. So there is, we think, for certain traits, a range of kind of how much you can be expected to stretch. But we're neuroplastic, our brains are changing every day. We can always stretch, right? Even the murderers, right? That's why rehabilitation exists. They can stretch. And so what I do is, to some extent, I teach ways to stretch your empathy higher. But a lot of what I do is teach autistic people how neurotypical people show empathy, and also teach their neurotypical friends, partners, families, how the autistic person is showing empathy. So that's more of a communication skill, where we're not assuming you don't have empathy. We're assuming that there's a misunderstanding in how you're communicating your empathy towards your family and their empathy towards you, right? Does that make sense?
I mean, it's also very complicated, because it's not like something you get to tell them to say, like, say these words and like you're fine. You know, sometimes it's kind of like how you say it too, and it's like easy to like understand it from like an outside perspective, but when you're in the person, so like, let's say someone died and you're trying to console them, you don't, like, you're not gonna be in the middle of it and be like, hey, I have to read my book. Like, what do I do next? You know, it's very like things can change fast. You know, they could be like quiet and all of a sudden crying, and it's like, you know, like, Daniel didn't prepare me for this. Like, I want a refund. So it's like very. So when you were born, so were you born kind of like we're going back to the numerical scale that like were you
Mhm.
born with like 0% empathy and then you just gained your way up?
Oh no, I think I have always been a relatively empathetic person, and I would say that most of the autistic people I know are relatively empathetic people. Again, our like range of empathy as a trait is about average. Like it's about the same as the neurotypical population, right? So most of us have roughly average empathy skills and roughly average, I'm trying to think how I want to say, roughly average positive feelings towards being, being a person with other people. But what I didn't have were the skills to communicate my interest in other people appropriately, quote unquote.
So like what is an example like what you would do and then like now, like how is it better now?
Yeah. So, you know how I said I'm a problem solver? That's a common autistic trait. A lot of us are problem solvers. And a lot of us, when we're talking to neurotypical people mostly want to communicate an emotional state, is my experience. You can come for me if you want. Autistics are just as interested in deep thoughts as neurotypical people. But if we hear someone complaining to us or giving us a problem, even if they're just sort of, this thing happened at work, it was really awful, that person might just want to get it off their chest. But to us, it sounds like an opportunity to help by solving that problem for them. So there can be this mismatch between, and that's a communication issue, right? There's a mismatch between how we are showing our empathy and, oh, that sucks for you, let's fix it, versus the person just wanting to be heard. Right. So that's one example. So I was really bad at that. And one of the things I had to learn to do was figure out, well, is this a time when you want your problem solved, or is this a time when you want to be heard and you want me to be here with you? Right. Another common issue is I'm a slow processor, which means that it takes a long time for the stimuli coming into my brain to make its way through and for me to figure out what to do with it. And so a lot of times I still to this day come off as rude when I'm not really intending to be rude, but I just didn't realize like what was going on. So I didn't pick up a vocal tone. I didn't pick up a facial expression. I blatantly misheard what the person said because I have audio processing issues. So I'm slow to hear. By the time I've actually heard what you've said, it's been longer than average. And all those things can come off as rudeness to somebody who's not aware of those issues, right?
No, I was gonna say like it's kind of like the same with women and men. 'Cause like women love to complain, and then like when they'll go to their boyfriend or husband or whatever and go, like I'm having this problem at work, and the male always go like, what do we like? Could you just talk to your like they'll give a solution, but then the women will like complain like I did want to ban and just not problem solve. So it is
Yeah.
kind of like a male versus female kind of dynamic. The males are always problem solving and female there's just complaining, I guess.
I think that just like there's a range in gender, there's a range in autistic people. So I can kind of only speak for the kind of autistic person I am. What I would say is that we know, again, research has shown us that women tend to be better at emotional intelligence skills than men are. That's not true against each individual, but as groups.
Yeah.
We think that's because of social training. We think that's because women are expected to be better at social emotional intelligence than men are. And so women grow up getting kind of more training in school and have higher expectations against that, where many men don't. Many men are not expected to be good at emotional intelligence skills or social
Well,
skills
I
specifically.
think that we're expected to be good. We're
Yeah.
expected to be not having emotional at all. 'Cause, like we're supposed to be men and nah.
Yeah, it gets very complex, doesn't it? And that's again back to the gender roles. So how are you supposed to be right in the world rather than how you are? So I think that autistics have similar issue, like any group, right, who's fighting against the norm and the social norm is going to have places where we rasp up against what we're supposed to do. So men aren't supposed to have feelings. So anytime you want to have a feeling, you're going to hit a wall. And the same thing with autistics. We're also not supposed to have feelings. And when we do, because we don't show them the same way as normal people, quote unquote, we hit that wall too. So I think it's just a case of current expectations for how emotions are handled in our society are bad for everybody. And so everybody has problems, right, with that. But
yeah, I'm just like sometimes surprised women want to date men. I feel like they should date each other. I feel like they'd be happier from an emotional intelligence standpoint. I guess like the women are more on the extreme side and the men are on the extreme side in terms of not feeling emotions. So if they could like meet together, I think it would help so many relationships and like help the world go around there. rounder?
I think this is a good example of kind of, I was talking before about how one of my goals is to help neurodivergent people and neurotypical people communicate better in both directions, right? So neurodivergent people shouldn't always be held to neurotypical norms, but neurotypical people should also learn like autistic communication, right? And I think that's kind of the same for men and women, is that men shouldn't be held to the standard of having no emotions, but women also need to hold men to that standard of developing emotional intelligence, right? That we need to go both directions. Empathy and communication all the way between all groups will go so far in solving so many world problems.
So would guess men are harder to train to be more empathetic than women?
No. Men have roughly, like, again, if you're talking about averages across populations, men have the same empathy as women, just like neurotypicals have the same empathy as neurodivergent people. It's all about socialization. It's how you're socialized. So how you're brought up, how your parents raise you, what values you have, how you are taught in school, right? What's encouraged and discouraged in your behavior. So if men are not encouraged to develop emotional intelligence, to have other male friends, right? To touch each other, to smile at each other, right? Things that women do all
No
the time.
homo.
Yeah, that's an example, right? Of culture norm saying, no, you cannot do this, right? Gayness is bad. And so you cannot show any emotion because you might be this bad thing. And that's wrong on like so many levels. Hopefully I don't have to enumerate some of them. It's a way that you're taught to not have emotion, to suppress emotional intelligence. And of course, when you don't use a skill, you get worse at it, right? Like any skill. So it's not that men can't have or don't have emotional, like they obviously do, at the same level as everybody else, but just that you're not expected to use it, and so it withers. Or when you do use it, you're punished for it. If you do reach out to make male friends, or if you are the kind of guy who listens when people talk and says, oh, that sucks, then you're girly, right? Or you're not masculine enough, right? So that's that's again rubbing up against the norm.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
dissuaded.
say. Like when someone tells me a problem, I just say that sucks because I'll tell a story. So I was at a party and we were having a house party for like a block in college, and I made cookies for the party, and one girl was allergic to. Well, I offered a cookie and she said no thanks, and then she said I can't because I'm allergic to eggs, and then I was just like that sucks.
Yeah.
And she didn't. Like everyone was more empathetic with her, but like she was still thrown back by my reaction of saying that sucks. That she like told the whole family and everything how funny it was.
Oh yeah.
And
why did she think it was funny?
I guess because more people are just empathetic with her and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then just go, "That sucks." Like just flat out, like I mean, it does suck. So I guess she just wasn't used to being non-consoled in that situation, because she probably said it so many times that my reaction was just so different. But like everything I'd like kind of go how it really is, not console them. It's more like that sucks. Like how can we? And then I get my problem solving goes, how can we? So you can have my cookies. Like, oh, make that time make cookie without eggs. Stuff like that. So I guess I'm like in the middle in terms of like some empathy, but also problem solving. So I guess I reach more into my masculine side of it.
That initial overture of empathy, that, oh, that sucks, or I'm so sorry to hear that, or whatever your verbal responses, and then the problem solving, both, like, that's neither masculine or feminine in terms of, it's just different approaches of emotional intelligence, right? So it's kind of like, because clearly you are an empathetic person, right? If your instinct was to offer some kind of consolation, right? So it's just a matter of, have you been allowed to express yourself in the past? And when you did express yourself, were you praised for it, or were you kind of shot down for it, right? That's what trains empathy. It's not like something like in our brains, we all want to be part of the human community, right? How that develops is just, how you're trained, how what skills you develop over the time that you're growing up. Yeah. So
let's talk about you. So like the sleep. Sorry, the kind of part of the job here.
No, it's good. It's fine.
So like you said that like as an autistic person, you're kind of, well, I guess for everyone, the way you're brought up is how you will be. So when you were growing up, so were you grown up in a positive, empathetic environment? Is that the right phrase to say?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, generally, I think that I was not identified as autistic until I was an adult. So I was brought up under the assumption that I was neurotypical, which wasn't great because I
But
think
you
it,
can be neurotypical but not autistic.
no. So I have always been autistic, but I wasn't known to be autistic until I was an adult. Does that make sense? Sorry.
So you were you're just saying you were neurotypical
I
growing
was
up.
raised, no. Sorry. I was autistic growing up, but I was raised as if I was a neurotypical. Like folks didn't realize that I was having trouble, is basically what I mean. So I just wasn't diagnosed until very late. Was expected to do all the things neurotypical people can do, a lot of which I can, which made it pretty stressful for me growing up and caused some kind of lasting harm. But also, my parents are good people and were doing the best they can. And empathy was very important to them. I was raised Unitarian Universalist, which is like a little a little religion that really prioritizes basically making the world as equal as we can for all the people who are living right now. So it's not a religion that's very focused on after you die. It's very focused on what can we do right now to make things better for everybody. And I think that's informed a lot of my kind of stance as an adult, is just try to make the world a better place and try to support the folks who need it. In that sense, empathy was a really important piece of the puzzle growing up. Was I good at it? No, not really. I was good at it within my family, but in school I struggled a lot because I was constantly overwhelmed by all the noise and all the lights and all the everything. I think I don't know, I would have to do a study of like my old high school friends, but I think I probably came off as a jerk most of the time just because I was so constantly overwhelmed and didn't process very quickly. I couldn't read facial expressions very well, so sometimes I would realize like 3 days later that somebody was mad at me, but in the moment it happened I had no idea, which makes it very hard to like come off as a competent.
Do you ever have like moments where you're like in the shower and then all of a sudden you're like, oh no?
Almost every day, like daily, even as an adult who is much better at this stuff now, daily and even sometimes hourly, because my processing can be very slow. And the people who know me well at this point don't expect me to process cues and will just outwardly like be very blunt with me, which I need. I need straightforwardness because I don't read cues well. In high school, no one knew how to do that and no one wanted to do that. And so I was just expected to pick up on all these social cues that I couldn't pick up on because it's not a talent. And yeah, I probably came off as a jerk basically all the time. So that's an example, right, of empathy being important to me internally, and internally being a really empathetic person who cared about other people, honestly. But like if you just knew me at high school, I probably didn't come off that way at all.
I mean, I know we're talking about all your problems right now, but like, but you sound normal and empathetic now. So I guess if I met you, I wouldn't think of you anything else, like except a normal person.
Mm-hmm. Well, autistic people are normal people, right? I think we just have different talents and strengths and sometimes different weaknesses. School was hard because it was overwhelming. And a lot of us have sensory processing issues, which means that lights can be overwhelming, sound can be overwhelming. In a one-on-one where it's just like I'm sitting in a comfortable environment in my house, I have my coffee, I'm talking to one person, there's not a lot of distraction, right? I can really kind of focus in and hear you. In school, or in a busy auditorium, or if we met at a coffee shop or something, right, in the real world in a non-pandemic time, I might be having a lot more trouble just because of the amount of stimulus that was happening around me.
But what do you say to the people that are like kind of the opposites of the parents? Because like you say you grew up in a positive, empathetic home.
Yeah.
But like how about people that like my parents are not empathetic at all, and I had a lot of hardships growing up. And I didn't have anyone to go to.
Yeah.
And then so like now I'm way more empathetic than they'll ever be.
Yeah.
And so I feel like to me it's that I learned things not to do in a bad situation and like do the opposite, or like treat others the way that I would want it to be treated when I was going through X situations. So like am I like a anomaly that I am better than my parents in terms of, I guess, social intelligence?
That's no, it's not an anomaly. I think that it's that nature versus nurture debate, which is not even a debate because it's both.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Okay. What is your question? Is it nature or nurture kind of? Like, what do you think is a nature or nurture or both?
Yeah, I think the science says it's both. That there is some biological, genetic, chemical inputs that determine our personality traits. And there are some that are 100% environment, which is who you're living with, who your friends are, where you're growing up, whether there's horribly polluted air where you are or not, that kind of stuff. As far as we currently know, as far as I know, all personality traits are a mix of both, right? So resilience is one of those personality traits. Resilience is how do you respond when something is awful, something traumatic happens to you, or a set of traumas happen to you, right? And we have a lot of research on trauma. And unfortunately, a ton of autistic and disabled folks are traumatized in various ways. The rates of PTSD in disabled and autistic populations is much, much higher than able-bodied neurotypical people. But resilience is a trait that says if you have a higher, if you can build this trait, so it's the same as any other trait. You have an internal sort of a range that you're born with, but you can push the upper limit of that range or pull it all the way down based on how you practice the skill. And so if you practice resilience, then you can become more resilient than you were when you were born. So even people who have undergone really terrible things and have been brought up in really awful situations can be highly resilient people and can come out of it with, great friends, great families, positive communities, building their own life, really self-actualizing. And some folks, even with very positive home environments and very positive support systems, still fail, right? There's a lot of examples of that too. So it's definitely complicated, but it is something that I always encourage clients to push with, because humans can become highly resilient. We have a lot of opportunity in us to be able to do hard things. And
I mean, I'll like disagree with you on that because I don't think
yeah.
I don't know like you growing up, but like mine situation is so unique that I'm like the top 1% of like shit you have to go through in life. And that's like there's like no debate about that. And I'm not expecting anyone to want to be in that situation. Like I was just forced into it, which is unfortunate. But I mean, some people just have comfortable lives. Like they don't have to do anything hard. So let's say you're really rich, you can just go life without a single care in the world. Like, but like, do you think all people that have gone through horrible shit are all better people? Because
no, not at all.
Yeah, because like I have met some people that have gone through really bad things, and they're still, they're still rude, and they're still like they still don't know how to be like, I guess, nice people.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm not making a claim that like you should have to go through trauma to become a decent person. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to make a general statement about the nature of humans from the evidence we have that humans can go through traumatic situations and still remain positive, the same way that humans can go through very easy, very calm lives and still fail. That resilience is a trait that you can develop in either direction.
Yeah, I always say the statement. I think everyone should always go through a really hard time to like discover themselves. Like for most people, they'll have to put themselves in a situation. So like it could be like, let's go on a 10-mile hike when you never walked more than a mile.
Some kind of challenge.
Yeah, like you put yourself to challenges to see kind of like what you're made of and such. So I think that's really important just for human development. I mean, everyone's still discovering their bodies even into their late 80s, I guess.
Yeah.
Even to the 100s. So like you always have to like test yourself too. And I guess it kind of like we're always in school. Like we're always like in school it's always scheduled. So like you have a test, like how much do you know about science and stuff. But like after college, like you don't really have tests anymore. And you're just kind of like on your own. And so we gotta create our own challenges.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think that growth is really important and we have to keep growing our whole lives as far as we can. And part of that growth is setting challenges, which does not mean exposing yourself to traumatic situations if you don't have to, but rather just means finding a stretch goal, right? Like something that's a little hard, but within the realm of possibility, right? And that's different for each person.
Yeah. So when you want to eat the extra cookie, eat the extra cookie.
Yeah, I am a fan of eating the extra cookie if you want to do it. I think that there are places where discipline is really great, but I think a lot of us are pushed to discipline ourselves way too hard. And life is, you get one, you might as well get out of it what you can and enjoy your cookies. Try not to,
but then if you like compliment yourself too much, it like hurts you more, because then so like my family is on the larger side, and like they've been pleasuring themselves, I guess, by eating more because they want the extra cookie. But like then when you stop and say, you know what, I have to like stop eating the extra cookie because now my weight is not working with me anymore. Like now I'm too, now I'm more lethargic, weaker. Now I just want to sit home and eat even more cookie. And it's like a downhill spiral.
Yeah. Eating your cookies shouldn't necessarily be a coping mechanism, right? Like if you're eating, and I'm not a dietary person, so like I've coached folks on it, but like you should talk to an actual nutritionist. I'll just say that for folks who are listening, but talk to an actual nutritionist. I am not a professional, but in general, you have positive and negative coping skills, right? You have, when stuff is hard, you have a set of things that you do to make yourself feel better. And some of them are supportive and helpful. Like maybe you take a walk, maybe you paint, maybe you do something, you read a book, you do something that makes you feel better, that is also in the long term helpful to you. And then you have negative ones, right? Which might be every time you're even slightly upset, you eat 6 cookies, right? That's not a good coping mechanism. Like, will it harm you in the short term? No, probably not. But in the long term, it's not great. And so part of coaching is we're always trying to say, well, how can we take this negative coping mechanism and make it slightly more positive over time, right? Like, is there something else you can do that will make you feel just as good as eating some cookies? Yeah, but also, like, why are you eating those cookies in the first place? Like, is it a thing that's making you feel crappy that we could just fix,
Yeah.
That makes you.
Would you believe me that I would probably be your hardest patient to deal with in terms of coping? Because like, I'll give an example. So you mentioned one, like eating. I can't eat food anymore.
Yeah.
So I can't eat in form. I can't walk anymore. So I can't do any exercises. Like I don't have outlets to do. So it's like I'm like kind of screwed in terms of coping, because it's like I don't have ways to really cope with it. And so it's like I feel like if you're a therapist and you're trying to like help me out, like you can't help me out because I can't do any of these things that a regular person could be able to do, and to help them out.
Well, I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach. So just to be clear, therapists get much more medical training than I do. But also, like, obviously you're in a unique situation and I don't want to downplay that. Yeah. But a lot of folks have limitations. And I would challenge you a little bit and say that even if you are not coping in any of the ways I just mentioned, right? I bet you have some coping strategies that you are using when you feel stressed, even if they're not, walking or exercising or eating, because everybody does. And so it would just be a challenge of figuring out what yours are and how they're affecting.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't like, to me, I just like, I guess, breathe in and breathe out and then just like let it go.
Yeah, there you go. That's a coping mechanism right there.
I know, but it's like I have like nothing else to do. Like I can't yell because then it hurts my insides. I can't really get emotional because it hurts my inside too. So it's like I don't want to get hurt even more. So it's like it's a very vicious cycle for me. So I don't even know how I'm alive from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah. It's really tough when you can't, the emotional stuff, especially when you can't process that stuff. Yeah, it can be really challenging.
Yeah, I'm just in a unique situation that's like, oh my God, like, but let's move on. So, so what's the difference between like emotional intelligence and then just like regular intelligence? Like, are they related at all, or what do you think?
Yeah. So intelligence is just a word that means how good you are at something in a general sense. So you can have all sorts of intelligence. You can have, I think what you mean when you just say intelligence is kind of smartness, right? How quickly you assess a situation and understand what's going on in it. Some people think intelligence means like how well you memorize things, right? Or what your memory is like. So those are all skills that you can build. Emotional intelligence is basically knowing what emotions are. So being able to identify that you're having an emotion and then name it. So is this feeling I'm having happy, sad, angry, upset, whatever it is. And then to stretch that, being able to identify much more complicated emotions like, my friend just had a baby and I'm so excited for her, but also I'm never, I'm not going to see her anymore because now she's busy with this baby. Like that's a really complicated emotional response. So, it takes some thought about what you're feeling to figure that out. And that would be like high emotion. And then emotional intelligence also has the aspect of being able to tell how other people are feeling and how you should respond to it, right? So if somebody comes up to you and is happy, that you want to respond with a certain tone and a certain body posture and a certain like face, right? If somebody comes up to you and is sad and you can identify that in them, then giving them the happy response is like totally wrong, right? Like it would offend the person.
Yeah, it get confusing because like my best friend, she's pretty energetic and such, and I'm very more calming person. But like when I was doing research, it was like, am I autistic now? Because like she's very energetic person and I'm like very calming person. And so like I recognize that she's happy and such, and like I guess I just can't express my happiness as much as she can. I mean, I think like one is a physical aspect because I can't like be animated and moving all that, but like am I autistic too, or is it more of a I'm just a calmer person?
Yeah. So I can't like diagnose you or not diagnose you because not a psychiatrist.
Man.
Sorry. But autism is a neurotype. That means your brain is a certain way and it can't be cured. It can't be changed. Most of us don't want to change it. You're born that way and you die that way. The same as being neurotypical. You're born that way, you die that way. It doesn't like change midway in your life. Like anybody else, there's a huge range in personality types, right? There's plenty of extroverted autistic people. There's plenty of introverted autistic people. There's plenty of people who like love video games and plenty of us who hate them. And like any kind of scale you could come up with for how people act, what people do, there's a range in autism too, right? So just because you have one aspect of autism in one way doesn't mean like you're autistic. You could look into it, but like it's having a set of traits permanently all the time and having, how do I say, like just one of them is not enough to like make you autistic. Does that make sense? So, and though I'm an autistic person, but I'm one and there's how many millions of us, right? So I might show happiness this way. Another person might show happiness a totally different way. We're both autistic. Like it doesn't make one of us not autistic, right? Just the same way having one trait doesn't make you not neurotypical. And I don't know if you're neurotypical or not. I'm not trying to make a claim for you. You can tell me. But
I don't know at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fair. But it's not just either way. It's kind of like it's not just one trait that defines that, right? It's a set. Yeah.
So do you like meet people and just go, hey, my name's Danielle and I'm autistic.
Sometimes,
watch out.
if it's relevant. I mean, honestly, it's kind of like you don't go up to somebody and say, hey, I'm Danielle, I'm non-binary, or hey, I'm Danielle, I have, I'm a parent. Like it's like any other piece of your personality where if it's relevant, you might say it like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I like this, I like to play Minecraft. Do you want to play with me? Maybe because you overheard that person talking about it, right? Or if I meet another parent, I might say, oh, I have 2 kids. Can we talk about them? Because it's a topic you're sharing with that person. But in a general sense, no, like it's not private exactly. Obviously, I'm on the internet talking about it, but it's not all of me. It's one aspect of me. And so there's no reason to point out that one specific aspect unless it is directly relevant. Like, hey, you noticed I noticed that you said that you're autistic. I'm autistic too, right? The same way you go up to a friend who's like reading the same book you are. Or a lot of times what I'll do is I'll point out a trait. So like if I'm talking to somebody and it's really loud, I'll say something like, I have a processing disorder and I'm having trouble with all these noises. Can we go somewhere else? Right. So yeah, if it's relevant, go for it. I'm not ashamed of it at all, but it's one piece.
Autism is I feel like it's too vague of a term to describe oneself. Like when you said that you have like processing disorder, that's way more understandable than just saying, hey, I'm autistic. Like that could mean almost anything in this day and age. Like it could, there's so many like you said, it's such a wide spectrum that could mean so much at this point. So like I when you said you're processing, that's way more understanding in like just 10 seconds,
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree. I think that there are some core aspects of autism that the whole spectrum depends on, but I wouldn't expect an average neurotypical person to know that, right? It's like walking up to anybody and saying, I have this specific type of virus and expecting them to know what the symptoms are. Like, And that's not a great analogy because autism is not a virus and my traits are
No.
not symptoms.
I
But it's the
mean,
idea
I hope
that
it's not.
no, it is not. But it's this idea that I'm not going to expect some random person that I just met to like understand a sort of complex set of traits. I'm going to
Yeah.
identify the one that's most pertinent to the situation and say, hey, you know, or sometimes I will go into a group and say, hey, I'm face blind. You know, once I recognize your voices, I'll know you. But if you find me, like if you see me in the grocery store or something before I recognize your voice, you might have to tell me who you are again, right?
I'm in the same situation if I'm not wearing glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're, yeah, I did read that you're face blind. I mean, so like the next time I see you, you won't recognize me?
I'll probably recognize your voice because we've been talking for a bit. But yeah, if you change your glasses, if you weren't wearing headphones, if you, yeah, probably, you know, because you have a lot, you have your glasses, your headphones, and your hat on right now.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at those. If you took them all off, you would look like a different person to me. I've also had trouble when folks like cut their hair or get earrings or like change their makeup.
Wait, hold
It
on.
can be
Even
really
makeup
challenging.
will throw you off?
Oh yeah, so much.
Really?
A lot, yeah.
Like what?
I'm really voice dependent.
Yeah, so what? Yeah, that's, I didn't think makeup would, because I feel like it's a facial thing. So is it like, so how would my face processing in your brain? Like, am I just, like, in my face the same as everyone else's? Is that how you're
No,
processing it?
well, kind of, yeah. I think, and I don't know. So this is hard for me to describe because I've never been not face blind. So I don't actually have a great understanding of what like non-face blind people see when they see faces. Does that make sense? Part of it is just that my visual memory in general is junk. Like if I look at something and then look away, the thing I just looked at is gone already. It doesn't stick at all. So part of it is that I have to look at something for a really long time before it gets in there and I can recall it later. I mean, my best guess is that I'm not noticing details in faces. So like, unless you have a really interesting nose that's really different from everyone else's nose, I'm probably not going to be able to like pull out your, you know, notice that nose on your face and be able to tell you apart from somebody with a very similar.
And
but
can you recognize yourself in a photo?
Mostly, yeah. Mostly because I remember what was happening in that photo. If you took some random photo of me that I didn't know you were taking and showed it to me, like after enough time had passed that I didn't recognize the street I was on or what I was doing, like the context, then I might not recognize myself,
Yeah,
but I'm usually okay with it.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we're in the same situation if I'm not wearing glasses.
Yeah.
But if I see them as they walk, or like you said, like the glasses and stuff, then I would know who they are. But you know, without those things, I wouldn't know. So I mean, like what? So like I heard about it. So I never met a person with it. So it just created to me that like you're watching a movie, but like you'll have no idea who's in it.
Oh, I'm really good at actors actually because they have distinctive voices. Yeah.
Really?
I'm I'm actually, I think, better at identifying people in movies and TV than I am identifying real people. Which is terrible to say out loud. I don't think I've ever said that out loud. But I'm actually one of those people who like can watch a cartoon and be like, oh, that's the guy from this other thing, because I'm good at voices. But
I think cartoons are a little easier because cartoons are so widely different in terms of characters.
But I can tell, like, if somebody's doing a voice in a cartoon and then they're doing a regular voice somewhere else, I can still tell it's the same person, which I think is a talent. Maybe it's what I should have put that in the beginning when you asked me what my strengths are. That's one of my strengths. I'm really, really good at that. But yeah, if you put two like white, dark-haired American actors next to each other and said which one was in this, no, I can't do that. If you give me their voices, I can tell you where they're from. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy because like you mentioned that you had like audio processing issues.
Yeah.
So I just assume you wouldn't have good audio listening skills, I guess.
Yeah.
And then like now you're saying that you're gonna recognize people, and it's like that's insane to me.
It's yeah. So my hearing is fine. Like if you put me in a hearing booth with an audiologist and tested me, my hearing is fine. Yeah. But what is not fine is this length of time it takes for me to get the sound into my brain, figure out what it means, and then formulate a response to it. So and that's what's slow.
Your processing speed is slow.
My processing is slow. Yeah. If I don't have to respond, like I hear pretty quickly. If I have to respond, the whole thing slows down pretty good. And also if there's competing noises. So if I'm in a noisy place where there's a lot of noises, I hear all of those noises. I can't filter like a neurotypical person does. So most neurotypical people can pick one thing that they want to focus on and kind of sort of ignore most of everything else that's going on. I can't do that. So if I'm in a coffee shop, all the noises are competing. So of course my processing is slower because I have to filter out through all that.
So like if your kid is crying, you'll be there for like 5 minutes and be like, oh shit, something's wrong. And then go or?
No, I hear them like that's a pretty automatic response. What I do struggle with is when both of my children are talking at the same time, because I literally cannot hear either of them. And I think neurotypical parents struggle with this too, but like I can't filter one noise as being more important than the other. So I have to say, I need to listen to you first and then I need to listen to you. Otherwise I can't hear either of you. I don't know if that's average or not. But
I guess they're too young to understand that you can't process.
They are getting better at it. They're 6 and 8 years old right now. And I think at least one of them also has an auditory processing issue. It's really hard to identify exactly. There's not like the testing for it is a pain in the butt, frankly. So I haven't put them through it. And I don't know that it matters at this point. But I think they're starting to get, we talk about one of them's autistic too, and one of them's ADHD. And we talk about the way different brains are different all the time in our house because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And that's one of the things we just talk about as a weakness of mamas is that I cannot hear two things at once and I need one at a time. I also get overwhelmed pretty quickly if they say, hey, can you do this and then do this and then do this and then do this? I'm like, no, I can do, one thing at a time. So it's just about finding the adaptation that allows me to still function pretty well.
But let's talk about how you got diagnosed then, because you are you're a late diagnosis, and I feel that would be rare. So like,
it's not rare. Doesn't that suck? There's so many of us. So many of us, especially people who are women or are born female identified. We are drastically underdiagnosed. So there's a ton of people. So I was not identified.
Like what triggered you to be like, hey, I might have I get audio processing. Like what trigger you to try to get diagnosed?
So I basically just thought I sucked at everything until I was like 30-ish. And when I'm really bad at times. That's a weakness. I can't remember. I had my son in 2013. So however long ago that was pretty quickly obvious that he was autistic. Like, I think I was pretty sure he was autistic by the time he was 1.5. So we brought him in to get diagnosed when he was 2.5. And in that time, I had just been researching, like once I became pretty sure he was autistic, I was just researching the heck out of it.
How can you tell at such a young age?
Oh yeah, you can usually tell pretty quickly. It depends on the kid because autism presents differently, but there's usually some developmental delay, as in sometimes kids don't walk as soon as they're supposed to. A lot of times there's a speech delay. So like I didn't realize this meant anything until a couple of years ago, but I didn't start talking until I was 3.5, which is pretty late for children to start talking. It's usually you start hearing words around 15, 18 months. My son,
but I mean, your English is perfect though.
Oh yeah. It's not like I can't learn to talk. It's just delayed development. I also, my son also didn't walk till late. He walks fine now. Yeah. So it's not like you can't do it. It's just the way that the brain is organizing is different.
No, I just say that because I would most likely born deaf, and I didn't hear till like the age of 2 or 3, and then had spent 15 years in speech therapy. So for me to hear that you didn't speak till you were 3 and then speak normally now is impressive.
Gotcha. Yeah. I had some ear infections when I was younger, and I probably lost some development due to that, but not too much. My son had chronic ear infections, so he wasn't deaf when he was born. But there was a period where he was at least mostly deaf. We don't have a great sense because he wasn't obviously speaking yet. And he was young enough that we couldn't, we don't have his feedback.
Yeah, that was the hard part, that when you're so young, like they wanted me to do the hearing test. And you're just young, you don't really know what's happening. So yeah.
I went to so many audiologist appointments with him, just sitting in that booth being okay.
The beeps and you can hear your own heartbeat.
Yeah. I kind of hated it, frankly, but we did it. It was important. We think there was a good 6-month period where he was at least mostly deaf. And so it definitely affected his language development. And he still is in speech therapy, and he's still like the way he makes his words is not quite where we would like it. He's still hard to understand sometimes, but he's getting there. Yeah. So the reason, sorry, we got like way off track. So the reason I thought he was autistic because he had these developmental delays, which are often seen with autistic kids. He spun everything. Like if there was a toy and he could spin it, he would spin it, which is one of those stims that's really common in autistic kids.
What, do they like to spin stuff?
To spin stuff. Yeah. There are kids who are neurotypical who just like to spin stuff, but it's like a really common autistic kid thing. I don't know if we know why, just because it's fun. It provides a lot of visual stimuli.
I mean, I like if there's something to spin, I spin it too.
Oh yeah, there you go. So yeah.
Maybe I am autistic.
Yeah, you could go talk to somebody if you want. Yeah. So anyway, we brought him in, and he was diagnosed pretty readily. And in that time, I had been just researching autism and trying to get because I knew a couple of autistic people, but not that many. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know anything about anything.
I feel like we were in the same boat in terms of like you think autistic, like you think of the typical autistic person, like they look different and act different.
Well, that's an autistic person that's visible, right? But a lot of us are just like me, like just hanging out, being people. And we might come off as a little weird or like maybe like a jerk because sometimes we don't process very quickly. But like you can't tell, I don't think, that I'm autistic unless I do something specifically autistic in front of you.
Well, I'm in that stereotypical autistic blinders, I guess. So like, of course you don't fit into it, but you're also autistic, but you're also trained to be the most non-autistic part of yourself.
I'm getting better at being more autistic.
Yeah, so
that's something I've had to.
Yeah, so you're doing your job, you're doing your exercise as well. Do not showing that you're autistic, right?
Not showing that you're autistic is called masking, and it's something that's actually not what we want to be doing because it's harmful to us to not be who we are. But a lot of us are taught to mask to fit in with everybody else. So part of my job is wanting autistic people to be as autistic as we want to be and just figuring out how to do that in a neurotypical society.
So you're just saying that everyone would just be rude to each other and like
rudeness is not like what autism is.
No, but like on the surface that you're rude, but you're not. You're just, I guess you understand each other.
Yeah, there are different communication styles in autism. So when I'm hanging out with autistic people, we're not like rude to each other, but we say what we mean because a lot of us don't like the politeness norms that are normal for neurotypical people are not normal for us. They take extra work and it's easier to just say what you mean. And if you expect somebody else to say what they mean, then you kind of agreed to a communication style that's not rude at all because you're there with the other person.
I totally get it. It's a very weird, it's a very weird societal thing. Like people,
it's very different.
Yeah. Everyone loves everyone to be like straightforward, but like, we kind of can't because
they say they want you to be straight. Neurotypicals say they want you to be straightforward, but if you do it, it's rude. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's where the problem comes in. It's like, do I go straightforward? Do I not? Like, it's not working. It's not working. But I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. No, we definitely do have more, different communication styles when we're with each other. We also like most, and again, it varies person to person, but most autistic people don't really getting to know you conversation. Like we want to talk to you about the real stuff that's really important to you and kind of like talk about real things, but the like, hey, how was your weekend? What do you think about the weather today? We don't like that stuff. That's just like a waste of energy. Neurotypical people need to do that before they feel comfortable talking to you about like important things though. So there's all these it's like different cultures almost.
Yeah. The more you talk, the more I'm like fitting this autistic girl. So now I'm just like you did name me everything I did like the past 6 months.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like skipping the boring talk of how would you do? And instead on like if I'm getting to know someone, like that's what everyone does. And it's like you only have like a minute to talk to someone before they get bored of you.
Yeah. Wouldn't you rather ask them something important and like what was the best thing that ever happened to you in your whole life? Or like,
Well,
what?
well, what I do is, what are you bad at? And that gets the conversation going because so the like depend. I guess a little too straightforward, but like kind of put yourself in a vulnerable role.
Mhm.
I guess, but I think that's a great open-ended question. I mean, it's also I think it also comes to like how attractive you are to. If you're ugly and no one's gonna want to like talk to you,
Uh, I
that
don't
helps
know.
too.
I think that I don't know. I'm one of those people who just is really interested in people and also face blind. So I don't really care that much how you look, but I do care about what you say. Like I am an audio based person.
Well, it's hard on the
So yeah.
Instagram world because everything is centered around sex. So, like, if I just hit up a girl, the first thing they're probably thinking of is he likes me. He thinks I'm cute or whatever. Like, we're gonna form a relationship and get married and have 3 dogs. I think that's like a typical.
Does.
Yeah, like I think that's a typical way of how like Instagram DMs work.
I think it might just depend where, like, I think there are probably some mini cultures in any kind of social media platform, right? So, like, there's a group of folks on Instagram who may act like that. I have not encountered them, but I believe you very much. I'm kind of in the like self development section of Instagram, but there's a problem with social media just making everything too pretty and too shiny, and that's not real life. So I try to keep mine real life if I can. But I don't know. What do I say? I always say I try to straddle the line between optimism and toxic positivity because I am not into toxic positivity at all. But I am very optimistic and I do believe in growth, in learning your whole
Yeah,
life.
like when I do the podcast, I just say the first thing I want to say, and like the first like message will be like something related about the podcast, so they kind of know where I'm going with, instead of
Yeah.
like, "Hello, how are you?" Again, then like everyone wants something from me, so no one's just gonna say, "Hey, how are you?" and just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, on social media, I mean, and honestly, if I'm on social media, it's as part of being a coach. And so I'm not really on there as like Danielle, who lives in this house with her cats. Like I'm really on there as Danielle, who is the neurodiverging person who does this podcast and this life coaching business. And so I kind of run myself like a business, like, this is what I'm here for. And this is how I can help you. And, I hope that people will approach me kind of as a business too and say, hey, I'm doing this cool thing, do you want to be involved, as opposed to being like, hey, how's your day going? Because
Yeah.
that's I don't have time for that.
Yeah, but I do the same.
so.
But let's go back to like, how were you diagnosed?
Yeah, we got way off, sorry. Okay, so my kiddo and I'm very divergent. I mean, there's a reason I'm called neurodivergent, because I just go this way. So
you're
okay,
a great guest. I'm enjoying the conversation.
I'm glad. Good. I'm glad you brought me back on track. You can always do that. So, okay. So my kiddo was diagnosed. I was researching a lot on autism and how it presents. And I learned that autism tends to present differently in women than it does in men. And also that women are like drastically underdiagnosed. And that there are like tons of women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who are late diagnosed autistic. A lot of women don't get diagnosed until we have kids who are autistic. So there's a ton of people my age who grew up without any kind of support or identification, who really needed that support. And so I did my research and, became self-identified as autistic. And the more I learned about how autism presents, I don't know how to say it. So before I knew what autism really looked like, I had all these like quirks, right? Like sometimes I couldn't eat certain kinds of food. Sometimes I got really tired and had to sleep for 2 days. Sometimes I couldn't hear people, but sometimes I could, like all these, sometimes I came off as rude and I didn't understand why. I had all these quirks. And then when I found out about autism and what it looks like, I realized that all of my quirks were actually just autistic traits. So it kind of gave me this, it really became, I mean, it sounds silly, but it kind of became my identity, because before I just felt like I was failing all the time. Like I was trying so hard and I couldn't work 40 hours a week. I kept getting overwhelmed. I had these huge depression, anxiety swings that came out of nowhere that I now realize were like autistic shutdowns because I was so overwhelmed all the time. I couldn't seem to like keep friends. I couldn't maintain the relationships. Like I care about friends, but like I couldn't maintain relationships the way neurotypicals obviously could. So I just felt like I was failing in like basically every facet of my life. And I've come to learn that that's a really common story that late identified autistic women have, especially, is because when you're autistic, all that stuff makes sense. Like there's reasons for it. But when you think you're a neurotypical and all that stuff is happening, you think there's something wrong with you. You just can't do it. Autistics tend to have sensory processing issues. We tend to have communication issues. We tend to have social issues. We tend to get overwhelmed. We tend to need more like individual time to process things. Even extroverted autistics need more time to recharge than the average neurotypical person does. So there's a lot of things that come along with being autistic that once I realized it was me, it just like restructured my whole world and the way I thought about myself. It really made me realize that I'm not a failure. I'm somebody who didn't get the supports I needed and was still somehow alive despite it, and had been working 3 times as hard as everybody else I knew to succeed less because I just wasn't getting any help. Getting the identification and kind of relearning who I was and reprocessing everything that had happened to me before and all the places I thought I'd failed that were actually just me like doing the best I possibly could, really changed my perspective. And that's part of why I'm a coach now, is because there are still so many people being identified late who are doing the same thing and who have internalized so much shame and so much like ableism and so much other junk around not being able to keep up with neurotypicals in a world that neurotypicals built for other neurotypicals and didn't build for us. So yeah, that was a little bit of a rant, but it was a big change for me, and it really helped me develop.
Wait, so are you saying that you diagnosed yourself?
I'm self-diagnosed. I would not be diagnosed officially because getting an autism diagnosis as a woman who's an adult is outrageously difficult.
In what way?
So the way that autism is currently diagnosed is based on research done on young white boys. Yeah, young white boys. So the way autism is diagnosed is for children. Most white men are identified pretty early, between like 5 and 8. It's getting better for white girls, but they're still diagnosed later than white boys are. People of color are diagnosed later than white kids, like almost always. It's very rare that men are late diagnosed. Women are almost always late diagnosed. So the way that they go about, if you go to a psychiatrist and you go through the whole profile, they need to talk to your parents. They need evidence from when you were a kid about how you acted, because by the time you're an adult, you've learned to mask. You've learned to pretend to be neurotypical, right? We talked about that a little bit before. And a lot of times we don't even know that we're doing it necessarily. We've just hit upon at some point a coping mechanism that worked for us, that made people take us more seriously or made people respond to us better. And so we mimic and we do that. And sometimes we can drop it, but sometimes it's not conscious. And so to get diagnosed officially, you need basically an entire family history. And even then, they mostly don't want to diagnose adult women.
No, it just seemed as more, it's not a test per se, like a genetic test or anything, but more like an evidence-based diagnosis.
Yeah, so the diagnosis process is really subjective. And it's something that I do think that as an industry, the medical industry is trying to fix it. Like a lot of folks are aware that the tests are racist, the tests are not picking up women. Like if you Google autistic women or late identified autistic women, or there's like millions of news articles. And so it's not an unknown issue. And it's multiple, not to make it like one test, there's multiple evaluations that go into an autism diagnosis, even for a child. But a lot of it is about how you present, right? Do you stim? Can we see you stim, right? Adult autistics tend not to stim in neurotypical spaces because we know you're going to look at us funny. So like, why would we do that, right? But if the doctors can't see you stim, then you must not be autistic. A lot of us have figured out how to fake eye contact. So the doctor won't see that we're not making eye contact, which is one of those like go-to autistic things. And there are plenty of autistic people who make eye contact fine, but it is like one of the traits that the medical community looks for when they identify us. A lot of us have all sorts of tricks for making it look like we're looking at your eyes and not looking at your eyes because we're adults. We've come up with these mechanisms, right? So there's a lot of ways that we mask that make us more invisible. And part of being identified as an adult is learning to figure out that you're masking and undo some of it. But it's hard. It's like you've been training one way for 30 years and suddenly you're like, oh, actually, I don't have to be this person I've been faking. I could be my own self. But it's tricky to break all that back down. Yeah.
But now that you learn that you're autistic, don't you not want to be yourself? Because then you'll just go back to the way things were before you started masking.
I have never not masked because let me rephrase that. In public spaces, when I had to work or be in school or go to the grocery store, I've always masked because I was trained to mask, because I was weird if I didn't mask. And I wasn't identified when I was a kid. So, and nowadays, at least where I live, you can see an autistic kid and be like, oh, they're just stimming and it's fine. In some places, it's still unsafe, right, to be an autistic kid who's not masking. When I was born, it was certainly not safe to be an autistic kid who was not masking. I learned to mask. And now I'm an adult and I get to decide what I do. And I'm a little bit safer because autism is better understood in some places than it is in others, but it is better understood. And so if I act autistic, quote unquote, then it's not kind of as big. It's not as likely to invite harm. It's not as likely to invite, people being bullies or trying to like chase me somewhere or, any kind of thing that people do. I'm myself either way. It's just how I'm presenting. Masking takes a lot of energy. So like sitting still right now is necessary for a podcast episode. Obviously I can do it. It takes a lot of energy. And when we're done, I'm going to get up and go do something.
You're welcome to movie. Like I generally have no problem with that.
Oh no, that's okay. Cause I'll have to go pace or something.
Yeah.
I'm also tapping a lot where you can't see. So you can probably see some movement, but yeah, I'm tapping a lot.
I deal with a lot of chronic illness people and such, and to do
Palsy
whatever makes you.
Yeah.
Like, I have no judgment on it. Like you're just doing you at this time.
No. I just mean that even when I record my own podcast, right, that there's a technological benefit to staying still and letting the mic pick you up and all that kind of thing, right? So I can do it.
So you're
so
you're saying you're masking now.
I mean, if and part of that is because I obviously talk to a lot of autistic folks, but I have to talk to neurodivergent folks all the time, or neurotypical people all the time. And also when I do these like lives or when I'm doing a podcast, honestly, most of the people listening to it are probably neurotypical. And so if I don't modulate my voice, and if I don't occasionally smile, and if I don't look roughly where your eyes would be if you were here in person, then I'm less likely to be taken seriously by neurotypical people, right? And sometimes that doesn't matter at all. Like sometimes I frankly don't care what neurotypical people think, but if I'm trying to communicate important information, it is in my best interest to do at least some masking, right? To make myself better understood. And there's also, it's not like, I think one of the issues with the masking terminology is there's this idea like you have the mask on and then you take it off. And for me, that's not really representative of the complexities of masking. I would say that, yes, sometimes I put it on and sometimes I take it all the way off. But more often, some of my behaviors are masking behaviors and some of them are not. And it kind of just depends on what I need to achieve in the situation, right? Solution focused, problem solving. What is the best way for me to communicate to this given group? It might require smiling. It might require modulating my tone more than I would otherwise. It might require sitting still or moving. I think a lot about how I present, because that's part of autism, is naturally I don't present in a way that most people take me seriously, which is frustrating but true. So
yeah, so you're saying that due to the birth of your son and having him go on his autistic journey, that I guess you were exposed to the information that some of the symptoms were lining up with what you were experiencing, and you kind of connected the dots and say, hey, I may be autistic, and then you did more research, and then you're just reading a whole autobiography about yourself that you've been going through for the past 30 years.
Basically. And then another thing I always recommend, so the truth is, if you can get diagnosis is not accessible for a lot of people because, like I said, of the whole testing situation, but also because of insurance and because there's not enough folks diagnosing in this country right now in the United States. I know the wait list by me is past 2 years long to get diagnosed. For kids, like much less for somebody like me. There's lots of reasons to not get diagnosed. But if you choose to self-diagnose, what I always tell people is, do your research, but also find other autistic people. Find them online, find them on social, join a group in your area, but like talk to those folks, because in my experience, you'll know pretty quickly if they're your people or not, And autism does sometimes get misdiagnosed as other things. And there are other things that look like autism that are not autism. So it is important to at least talk to some medical professionals and try to get their opinion before you just decide you're autistic.
Yeah. When you were listing all the symptoms, I relate to a lot of them now. So now I don't know if I'm autistic or do I have explanation for other things that would seem like autism. So one example would be the audio processing. So if I'm in a very crowded place, I have difficulty hearing, but I wear hearing aids. So I guess you could blame the hearing aids not be able to pick up all the sound and such. But another thing is I don't do well in groups. I get super quiet and shy. So I don't know if that's a coping mechanism from me growing up, because when I was growing up, I always have to be kept quiet and my opinion wasn't respected. So I never talked and such. So I don't know if that's a childhood trauma kind of thing or that an autism way. I do great on one-on-ones and such, but when I come to a group, I think I'm really quiet and my full personality doesn't come to that. And it's just not my friend group, is all groups and such. I was asked to host a group seminar thing, and I'm just oh my God, everything I hated, I have to be doing. So I don't know, now I don't know if I'm autistic or do I just have the symptoms and there are other causes to it.
Yeah. So autism is really complex, and there are a lot of traits kind of associated with being on the spectrum, and all autistic people are unique. And so there are plenty of, for example, you mentioned the audio processing. There are plenty of neurotypical people who have auditory processing disorder. I actually have a podcast episode with Suzanne Damali, whose son is neurotypical but had auditory processing disorder in school. So you can always have 1 or 2 or 3 traits that are sort of quote unquote autistic traits and still be a neurotypical person. Just like autistics have neurotypical quote unquote traits, humans are diverse and we vary. I think it's when the amount of traits and also autistic experiences start to overwhelm the neurotypical ones that is really good to start thinking about it. And so talking to a medical professional, talking to a psychologist, doing your own research online can be really valuable. It's also to some degree socialization, because a lot of for kids, one of the things they do when they're trying to assess if a child is autistic or not is they rule out hearing loss and deafness, because there is some social difference between, or how do I want to say it? A child who's experiencing deafness might have similar traits to an autistic child, but they're from different sources. The traits are a response to not being able to communicate, right? So an autistic child is having trouble communicating. A deaf child is also having trouble communicating for totally different reasons, but the response by the child can be the same, right? So that's one of the processes of getting diagnosed for autism is you go through all this hearing stuff to make sure that you're not experiencing hearing loss. When we're looking at the traits, I think it's important to, and again, I say this not being a medical professional, so please talk to a medical professional, but it's important to think about why is the trait there, right? What is that trait? People have behaviors for reasons, right? We don't just do things, we do things because of. So if we're having an auditory processing issue, that could be related to slow processing all over because of autism, or it could be related to hearing loss, or maybe your hearing aid, or it could be related to something totally different, right? So it just depends where the trait is coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just I think the biggest thing I would like to do, and I feel I can't do it, is laughing when other people are laughing in a more vocal manner.
Yeah.
I'll do a chuckle or a smile, but I'll never be laughing, I guess. like the way you do, and like I don't know, like if you're masking it and you're laughing just because that's like what normal humans do, and like I know like when things are funny and like I'm a funny person, but like I don't know if it's a childhood trauma, like someone told me I laugh weird and I just never laugh again, kind of trauma, or this. Like I don't know. Like I feel like I'm gonna be so much. There will be so much self revelation on myself if I'm autistic or not, because a lot of things you said resonate with me, and now I don't know. I don't know if it's like, and then I also don't know if there's anything I can really do about it. Like I don't feel like I can get any better than how I am now, and kind of did. Like I guess my last question would be like, could you just accept yourself as is and move on, I guess?
Yeah. I sought a diagnosis for my kiddo because we needed speech therapy, and insurance didn't cover speech therapy unless you were autistic or had a stroke, which was really frustrating and silly. And so he was autistic, so I got him the autism diagnosis. If he hadn't needed speech therapy, frankly, I don't know if I would have gotten a medical diagnosis. Like would I have known he's autistic? Yes, like he would still be autistic even without the diagnosis. But I don't think you need to do anything special as an autistic person except to be okay with yourself. I think a lot of what I had to do realizing as an adult that I was autistic was to reframe how I thought about myself, right? And all that kind of internalized shame and trauma and frustration over feeling like I wasn't good enough. If you don't have any, like if you're feeling, how do I say, if you're not struggling, right? If we're like, I was constantly melting down, shutting down. I told you I had trouble maintaining friendships. I couldn't keep a 40-hour-a-week job, which meant I was always struggling for money and making enough. So there are just all these pressures, and all of them were sourced in how I was handling not the autism itself, but my coping mechanisms for the autism, because I didn't know what was there. Now that I know I'm autistic, I can cope differently, and I can kind of create different outcomes for myself. So I feel like if the knowledge of being autistic helps you and helps you live your life better, then awesome. If being autistic or not autistic wouldn't change anything for you, then there might not be any reason to.
I guess the difference between you and me is that for you didn't have a reason of why you were acting this way. And I kind of have a reason. So I guess I was more okay accepting myself. But like for you needed that reason to why you're acting this way. And now that you know, you're more accepting of yourself and saying,
absolutely,
that there's nothing really wrong with me. It's just how I am. And and like to me, you're doing a great job masking. Like I would never, I guess in a million years, know that you're autistic. So I guess you're doing a great job.
Well, thanks. I kind of. I think I also have days where I have to mask more. Well, no, let me take that back. There are days where I don't mask at all and days where I do. And just like everybody wakes up with different moods. I also think that there's a range in autistic people as to how interested we are in mimicking neurotypical social norms. And I definitely don't mind making eye contact and smiling to the extent that some autistic people do. And so it's almost like it's not even quite masking, because I would probably do it. You asked about my laughing earlier. I actually like over laugh. I'm the kind of person who laughs when somebody says something and I shouldn't have laughed. So I often have to apologize more for laughing than not.
Well, I think
but it is authentic.
Yeah, it's great, and it comes out more likable as a person.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. No, I definitely have gotten in trouble for, and honestly, this is another common, in case you're autistic and you're listening, another common autistic trait is laughing inappropriately, quote unquote. And I don't know why we laugh inappropriately. I don't know why I do. My sense of humor is warped in my defense, but
I feel like that's a lot of people though. So it's kind of, it's a very like thin line between autism or you're just crazy, you know?
No, I guess that depends on how you define crazy. But
again, crazy it's as in like if you laugh at an inappropriate moment. Like,
well, if you're going to define crazy as laughing at an inappropriate moment, I'm going to say like 80% of human beings are autistic or crazy.
That's what I'm saying. It's a very thin line.
Yeah. Well, again, autism is a group of traits, right?
Yeah.
So any single trait can't be it. It has to be like the overwhelming mound of traits.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I'm definitely one of those inappropriate laughers, which is not great sometimes.
Yeah, we're
but
gonna be great friends now.
yeah, good. Yeah.
So before I take the mic away from you, is there anything you want to plug? Say, the mic is all yours.
Well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I guess I'll just say that I am at neurodiverging.com. I have a blog and a podcast, the Neurodiverging Podcast, which is on any streaming service you like. And I'm also on social at Neurodiverging with an ING. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook. That's mostly where I am, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll post all her information in the description below, and her Instagram handle will be under her face right now. So thank you for everyone for listening and watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.